Kyle Dawson had come in early that Saturday, intent on buying a high-end tablet for his little sister's upcoming birthday. He was a junior at the state university, working two part-time gigs to cover tuition, and the gift was a splurge, something he'd been saving for over months. The suburban electronics megastore on the edge of town was busy with holiday early bird traffic. Customers lingered over displays, sales associates hustled between aisles, and the smell of coffee drifted from the in-store cafe. Kyle lingered longer than usual in the smart device section, comparing specs, reading fine print, and nervously double-checking his budget on his phone. He was the kind of shopper who asked too many questions, not because of indecision, but because he wanted the right model and didn't trust impulse buys. His backpack sat on one shoulder. He shifted it from side to side, a subconscious nervous habit born of being a kid who'd grown up watching people around him get accused for looking like they didn't belong. The store's security camera captured him lingering near a display of expensive accessories as two women in designer coats, part of a practiced shoplifting crew, moved past, creating a diversion by loudly arguing over a returned item. On the other side of the aisle, Nate Briggs, the store's junior loss prevention officer, saw Kyle's posture, shoulder tensed, eyes shifting toward staff, fingers fidgeting with his phone, and coupled it with a thin profile, hoodie slightly askew, and a flicker of the background argument. Without asking a manager or doing a quick, discreet check, he radioed for backup and approached Kyle with a curt, "Sir, can I see what you've got going on here?" Kyle answered politely, explaining he was just looking and had no intention of doing anything wrong. Nate's suspicion hardened into action. He asked Kyle to step aside, then asked him to empty his pockets and backpack in the middle of the aisle. Kyle complied, confused and increasingly embarrassed, as a small crowd gathered, some whispering, some recording on their phones. A manager arrived, told Kyle the police were coming because he fit a profile of people who had been shoplifting in the past month. Within minutes, uniformed officers arrived. The officer, following Nate's hasty summary, formally detained Kyle, read him a few rights in the same clipped tone that treated his confusion like guilt, and took him to the security office. His identification, his receiptless hesitation, and the way his hands shook from anxiety were all documented as indicative behavior. He was handcuffed, his name run, and, because of a database flag on a similar-looking person from a different town, held for questioning. He wasn't violent. He wasn't carrying stolen merchandise. The only thing suspicious about him was a combination of his appearance, the frictionless assumption of guilt, and a convenient distraction manufactured down the aisle. The officers released him after 30 minutes with a perfunctory apology. "We're sorry for the misunderstanding," but the mark remained. His friends who'd seen the interaction online through a shaky video he'd posted were outraged. His mother called in tears, demanded answers. The encounter followed him into the day. His campus friends gave him awkward pats, and the social media clip accumulated comments that ranged from sympathy to bitter dismissal. Kyle left the store feeling smaller, watched, and also acutely aware that somewhere deeper than the humiliation was an unresolved puzzle. Why hadn't anyone seen the women behind him moving with odd coordination? Aisha Carter, the electronics department manager, had been with the chain for nearly 8 years. She was the kind of leader who memorized loss prevention reports like others, read morning briefs, who could rattle off SKU-level shrink trends, and who had a quiet reputation for noticing the intangibles. The way foot traffic ebbed before a theft spike, the cadence of a crew's conversation when they were casing a section. A black woman from the same city's west side, Aisha had built her career twice over, as a sharp operator and as someone who had learned to navigate the unspoken hierarchies that often dismissed her insight until it was too late. She was in the back office reviewing weekend staffing when she saw the clips circulating internally. The young white man being confronted, the rapid escalation, the escort into the security room. Her stomach tightened, not because the customer matched any known pattern of prior thefts, but because she knew the look of people being used as scapegoats. Her screen pinged with a message from Kyle's public post. He'd tagged the store in a thread describing what happened and asking, "Is this normal?" Within minutes, a dozen comments from other shoppers, some saying they'd witnessed similar heavy-handed profile checks on people who didn't fit the typical theft demographic, had piled onto the post. Aisha went to Nate, who was in the break room, flipping through a loss report. "Walk me through what happened with the guy in electronics," she asked, neutral but firm. "He was acting odd, hanging near the accessories." "We got a call from a sales rep saying they were watching something," Nate offered, defensive reflex flaring. "He refused to answer directly, and I know the behavior. He fit what we've seen before, anxious, skittish. We brought him back. Cops cleared him, but we had to follow procedure." Aisha didn't accept the shorthand. "Did you see the two women create a distraction?" she asked. He shook his head. He'd been focused only on Kyle. "What's their movement pattern? Did you check their past receipts? Camera angle 3 shows the right side of the aisle. Pull it." Nate was reluctant. The idea of going back felt like admitting a misjudgment. Aisha overrode him, citing the store's loss prevention manual. Every escalation had to be validated, and every false positive had cost. Not just in potential customer alienation, but in trust. She pulled the footage herself. In slow motion, she saw the pattern. The two women in designer coats, one creating a loud argument with a floor associate about a return, the other subtly switching high-value items into her bag, while Nate and another junior guard were focused on Kyle. Then, as if scripted, they drifted toward the exit, blending into the shopping flow, while a Confederate from a half aisle over looped back to the same zone, planting a small, inexpensive item near Kyle's previous position, an old trick to validate the suspicion after the fact. Something deeper clicked. Aisha had seen similar choreography before, a ring using the same diversion and scapegoat tactic, where the suspicious person was a human shield, drawing attention while the real theft occurred, and then he or she would be used to explain away why alerts had triggered. She didn't know yet whether it was local or coordinated, but she knew enough to start mapping. She reached out to Kyle through the store's customer relations channel, asking if he'd be willing to talk in private, not to rehash what happened for drama, but to answer a few questions. Kyle, still rosier from his anger, expected another perfunctory apology. He met her in a small conference room. Aisha explained what she'd seen in the footage, apologized for the store's mistake, and asked if he'd be willing to help her understand what he noticed. Any odd people, any sequence of noise, anything that felt off beyond his own interaction. Kyle, initially skeptical, found himself energized. Someone believed his story without needing him to prove anything beyond being himself. He agreed, and the two of them began to stitch a plan. Aisha started the formal scratch work. She pulled a week's worth of shift change footage, membership card scans, and recent shrink reports filtered by aisle. She flagged patterns, several suspicious interactions, like Kyle's, where innocent shoppers had been pulled aside in electronics or accessories, all coinciding with small, high-value items going missing from adjacent displays. The ring's signature became a ghosted pattern. There was almost always a loud diversion, a junior guard distracted, and then an innocent bystander being scrutinized, while the real pilfering happened either in blind spots or under the guise of checking returns. She also looked at the returns desk logs. The ring was savvy enough to push some stolen goods through friendly returns at other store locations, or to move mid-tier merchandise to resell, while the high-ticket items, tablets, earbuds, and gaming consoles, were passed along to fenced resellers. She tracked one series of tags through the loyalty system, a small bump in the activation of warranty cards tied to purchases flagged from other outlets. There was a breadcrumb trail of a shell company used as a bulk buyer, moving inventory off the books. Kyle became a foot soldier in the sense of providing human texture. He went back into the store under Aisha's guidance, shopping normally, and the two arranged subtle signals. Kyle would act as a decoy in a different zone, while Aisha had her backroom analyst watching for familiar choreography from the ring. They also compiled witness statements from a couple of customers who had been unnecessarily searched previously. A young black father had been pulled into a secure area for routine bag check, while a well-dressed white woman using the same aisle had not, even though the father had done nothing more than look perplexed at a price. The inconsistencies strengthened the narrative that the ring thrived on systems already biased in what they chose to scrutinize. Aisha looped in a trusted detective from the local precinct, Detective Sarah Marin, one who had a reputation for following facts, not headlines. Sarah was initially skeptical that an internal retail manager could build a case strong enough to stage anything beyond internal training. But when Aisha laid out the pattern, showing how the same technique had been used to frame and push away innocent shoppers, while real thieves escaped, the way inventory outflow didn't match the list of suspects, the detective agreed to quietly observe and coordinate. They decided to set a trap, one that would expose the ring in the act, with hidden cameras, controlled decoys, and a back channel to prevent the diversion from working. Word of Aisha's investigation leaked in the margins. Gregory Harlan in loss prevention, a regional director brought in from another district, called her into a conference call. "We don't go public with these things," he said, voice steady with corporate caution. "If you're chasing a pattern, follow it internally. Don't drag a customer through the mud again. We can't have headlines about false accusations or internal theft rings that look like we don't have control." The unspoken warning was clear. Move carefully, don't embarrass the brand, and don't implicate too many moving parts that might suggest systemic blind spots. Nate, meanwhile, bristled. Being subtly called out for prejudging customers threatened his job narrative. "You're making it sound like I was profiling," he snapped, "when I was just doing my job." That guy did seem nervous. "We have to assume something, Aisha." She didn't back down. She showed him side-by-side footage of similar nervous customers who'd been left alone when no diversion was present, and the movement of the ring who never looked nervous because their job was to blend. Slowly, the edge in Nate's eyes shifted to a begrudging understanding. His defensiveness softened when she offered him a role in getting the real thieves caught instead of just being reactive. The ring wasn't blind. They felt the increasing attention. One evening, as Aisha stayed late to pull feeder data, she found her office door ajar. Her workstation had been rifled, not stolen, but gotten into. Someone had scrolled through her recent investigation files. A soft, unnerving knock on the glass partition followed. A plainclothed man with a rehearsed smile left a small bouquet of flowers with a note. "Some things are better left alone." The threat was clear without being overt. Stop digging, or the consequences would be subtle. She forwarded the incident to Detective Marin, who discreetly increased her team's presence nearby and arranged for a covert recording of the next known pattern evening. Aisha also faced the internal dilemma of involving Kyle more visibly. She worried that if they used him too publicly in the sting, he might get retargeted or retaliated against by the ring's allies. Retaliation that could play into the stigmatized narrative of troublemakers, even though he had been the victim. She sat with him over coffee, explained the risk, and he, firm in his gratitude and sense of justice, insisted, "Let me help. They took my afternoon, my dignity. If this catches them, I'll be glad to get in front. Just keep me safe." They formalized a plan with Detective Marin. Kyle would be a public face, but only in the controlled environment of the sting, with plainclothes officers ready, cameras capturing everything, and backup ready for any attempt to intimidate him mid-exposure. They chose a Friday evening during a pre-holiday sales surge, when the store would be crowded enough to plausibly facilitate the ring's choreography, but with enough staff and undercover law enforcement embedded to contain the operation. Aisha and Marin coordinated with a precinct narcotics-style undercover team, placing hidden audio-visual devices in strategic sightlines and having a decoy innocent shopper, a volunteer who had previously been pulled aside in a similar setup, positioned as bait. Kyle checked in, wearing a plain jacket, a small earpiece to get updates, and a composure that came from being briefed on what this looks like if you're safe and if they try to pull you, coached by Aisha to act natural, not to give them any reason to move outside their script. The ring appeared in their practiced rhythm. 2 women, the argument diversion, a third collaborator who slipped behind them to pick small items, and a fourth, who had a history of being the fall guy, strategically positioned near a customer straightening his jacket, Kyle, on purpose, in a different section. As the diversion flared loud and theatrical, hidden feeds tracked their hands, the switching of goods, the subtle casing by a 5th member near the exit. The undercover officers, in civilian clothes, didn't interfere. The plan hinged on the ring thinking the usual chaos had cover. At the moment the ring moved to the cashier to pass the stolen items through friendly returns or to funnel them to a fence contact loitering outside, Detective Marin gave the signal. Lights from the back room flicked soft red, a silent internal cue, and the ring's key members were cordoned off quietly by a team who had unobtrusively closed adjacent areas for a security check. Simultaneously, officers intercepted the fence contact outside before he could slip the high-value gadgets. The women tried to disperse, one attempting the old play, pointing fingers at a nearby shopper and shouting about being harassed. But the recorded footage they'd been unaware of, the simultaneous detainment of their network, and the presence of credible witnesses neutralized the distraction in real time. Aisha, having the full picture, walked the floor in plain view, making sure the innocent shoppers like Kyle were not further harassed, and stepped into the path of the ring's most vocal member. "You're done," she said quietly, near her microphone, the words carrying the weight of institutional authority. Marin read them their rights, while Kyle, cameras rolling discreetly, watched the same choreography that had once made him suspect now fall apart in a different key. The evidence, footage, intercepted fencing attempt, pattern confession from a lesser member, hoping for a smaller charge, was airtight. The aftermath was swift and public, but not the kind Aisha had feared. At a midday press briefing held in a conference room near the store's main entrance, District Management Detective Marine and the Regional Loss Prevention Director stood before a handful of local outlets. The shoplifting ring was unmasked. Charges of organized retail theft, conspiracy, and attempted framing. The fence network was exposed. Some of the stolen items that had already moved were retrieved with the help of the ring's lower-tier cooperative, who cut a deal in exchange for reduced sentencing. Aisha, flanked subtly by the store's PR liaison, who had been coaching the messaging, made a point to insist that the narrative include the wrongful arrest of Kyle Dawson. "We failed him first," she said directly in front of the cameras. "We jumped too quickly to conclusion. He was innocent. His dignity was taken away. He helped us uncover the truth. That's the full story." The earlier security guard Nate was present, tightly folded in the back, his posture different, up often forced by corporate to accompany the statement. He stepped forward when the moderator asked about internal bias and offered an acknowledgement that stretched beyond procedural correctness. "We rushed," he said, voice quieter than usual. "We let assumptions substitute for evidence. That's on me. We're retraining. I'm retraining. That's the only way to make it right." Aisha watched, and when the cameras weren't on her, she nodded subtly, as much to herself as to the system being forced to own its fracture. Kyle was brought forward, his image now side by side with the thieves' case files in local papers. He gave a short statement. "I was embarrassed. I was scared. But I'm glad someone saw deeper." He hugged Aisha afterward, gratitude spilling out. The police released an official exoneration and a letter of apology from the store, and the corporate memo that went out to regional branches cited the incident as a training case. Avoiding premature profiling, building a more equitable loss prevention response, with Aisha's methodology presented as a best practice model for how to pair data observation with human oversight. The ring's exposure had ripple effects. The lower-level accomplices who had been used to frame others flipped, providing testimony that detailed the internal hierarchy of the operation and how they used innocent shoppers to mask their patterns. Several arrests followed outside the immediate county as the network's connections were traced. The store implemented immediate policy changes, a hold before detained protocol for suspicious customer interactions, requiring dual confirmation before involving law enforcement when the only evidence is behavioral, and a transparent customer advocacy liaison for anyone accused. A green internal bulletin highlighted the new bias and pattern review panel Aisha proposed, ensuring that people brought into investigations had the power to question escalation decisions. Months later, the store's loss prevention training looked different. New hires were brought through a module co-developed by Aisha, which included role plays with false positives, de-escalation, and the Kyle Dawson case study, emphasizing both the human cost of assumptions and the importance of systematically chasing the true patterns behind theft. Nate, now a trainer, led one of the sessions himself, his voice steady, his earlier defensiveness traded for a candid admission in front of his peers. "I thought I was protecting the bottom line. I was hurting people. The bottom line is better when we don't lose trust." He didn't shy away from naming his mistake. He treated it as a collective warning. Kyle, inspired by the experience, and by Aisha's refusal to let a systemic error be glossed over, began to volunteer with a community-based youth outreach that taught financial literacy and ethics to teens. He spoke about his own humiliation, how quickly society can make someone a suspect, and how one person's choice to act with curiosity instead of certainty cleared his name and exposed a criminal network. He started a small podcast about seeing the pattern, where he interviewed business owners, retail workers, and managers about trust in commerce, giving space to voices often dismissed. Aisha's profile within the company grew, but she deflected awards into structural resources. She lobbied for a community advisory board tied to the store's regional franchises to serve as early warning and feedback loops, and she secured a small grant to fund shopper safety ambassadors, employees trained to help customers navigate and mediate flagged incidents in real time. Detective Marin and Aisha held joint training sessions for neighboring retailers, spreading the model beyond their town. Marin's precinct created a liaison position specifically for retail sector collaboration, citing the way their partnership had broken a ring and prevented further wrongful detentions. The shoplifting ring's bust became not just about stolen goods recovered, but about a culture recalibrated. The store's publicly posted customer care pledge was rewritten to include language about preserving dignity while preventing loss, and a small commemorative plaque in the employee training room bore a simple line: "For those who saw truth beneath suspicion." Kyle, visiting on the anniversary of the sting with his sister, saw it and smiled, then walked over to Aisha's office to drop off a small framed note. "Thank you. You didn't just clear my name, you made our community safer." Aisha kept pushing. The ring's fallout gave her the leverage to ask for a permanent investigative analyst on her team, a position that combined data modeling with real-time human oversight. She hired a young black analyst fresh out of school and taught her the same principle. Patterns don't speak for themselves. You have to listen, verify, and never let the first easy narrative drown out the deeper one. The story ended publicly, with justice served, reputations restored, and a system inching toward being less brittle. Privately, it lived as a layered reminder that vigilance without humility weaponizes suspicion, but vigilance with equity builds lasting trust.